The villagers gathered under the wide sky, their hearts a mix of joy and unease. The bride stood still, her beauty captivating, yet her presence brought whispers that hung in the air like an unseen cloud. Drums echoed through the crowd, and voices sang, but behind the music, doubt lingered. An elder approached, carrying a bowl of water. He raised his hand, his voice trembling as he spoke words of blessing. His eyes lingered on the bride's face for a moment longer than they should, then quickly turned away. The crowd noticed, though no one dared to speak of it. The groom stepped forward, his posture firm and his voice loud. "No curse can touch what is pure. Today begins a new story." His declaration silenced the murmurs, and for a brief moment, hope replaced fear. The night passed with feasting and celebration, but the air remained heavy. Morning broke with a scream that shattered the calm. A boy stood frozen near the hut, his small frame trembling. Others rushed to him, their steps quickened by the terror in his eyes. Inside, the groom lay still, his face pale, his body cold. Gasps erupted, followed by silence so thick it felt alive. Then came the whispers. "It has happened again," someone said. The chief arrived, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "Let no one speak hastily. There is work to be done." Yet the whispers only grew louder as people exchanged fearful glances. The villagers mourned quietly, their grief shadowed by suspicion. Among them, an elder's sharp eyes caught movement at the edge of the clearing. A black mamba, sleek and silent, glided through the grass. "There," the elder said, pointing, his voice low. The snake paused, its head raised as if listening, then vanished into the forest. A sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "A spirit walks with her," it hissed. The crowd turned, their fear ignited. Suspicion spread like fire. The bride stepped out of her hut, her face pale but calm. Eyes followed her every move, but she kept her gaze forward. A group confronted her, their words sharp and accusing. "You bring death," they said. Her voice, when it came, was steady but filled with sorrow. "I never asked for this." The tension grew until the chief intervened. "Enough," he said, firmly. The crowd hesitated but stepped back, though the air was thick with distrust. Later, the villagers gathered to discuss what must be done. The chief stood at the center, urging calm, but voices rose around him. "She must leave," one shouted. "This curse will destroy us all," another added. An elder raised a hand, his voice cutting through the noise. "The truth is not always what it seems," he said, his words lingering like a warning. The crowd quieted, but the division among them was clear. Stories of the bride's past resurfaced, spreading like shadows. Each tale told of a wedding, joyous at first, but followed by tragedy. Husbands lost, lives shattered, and whispers of curses. They spoke of dying animals, charms that broke without cause, and omens too strange to ignore. "I never wanted this," the bride said, her voice barely above a whisper. But no one seemed to hear her plea. A hunter stepped forward, his face grim. "I saw something near the hut," he said. He described strange symbols carved into the ground, their shapes unfamiliar and unsettling. Another voice added, "The same marks are on her arm." The chief looked to the bride, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something unspoken passed between them. The blacksmith spoke of a dream that haunted him in the early hours. He saw a shadowy figure standing in the forest, its laughter cold and menacing. "It said doom is coming," he confessed, his voice shaking. The healer, known for his wisdom, stood tall. "Then we must act," he said. "This cannot continue." As the day turned to night, the villagers retreated to their homes, fear gripping their hearts. They waited in silence, each wondering what the next day would bring. By the river, the woman sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze lingered on the flowing water, yet her eyes held a weight that spoke of hidden sorrow. Children played nearby, their laughter rising into the air, but even they avoided her. Their whispers, though quiet, carried an edge of curiosity and fear. Behind her, a pair of villagers exchanged hushed words. "She carries a darkness," one said. "She's more to be pitied than feared," replied the other, though their voice faltered. The woman made no move to acknowledge them. The water rippled, reflecting the pain she kept buried deep within. In the village, the healer knelt by the abandoned hut. His fingers traced faint marks in the dirt, symbols carved with precision but their meaning unclear. A faint trace of venom lingered near the edge of the bedding, its scent barely detectable. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "This is no ordinary tragedy," he muttered. He rose to his feet, determination hardening his features. There was more to uncover, and he resolved to find the truth. At the marketplace, the woman's name spilled from jealous lips. "She must be cursed," said one, her voice sharp. "How else can you explain it?" Her companions leaned in, eager to hear more. "A curse," one echoed, nodding solemnly. The story twisted with every telling. Soon, the market buzzed with rumors, spreading like wildfire through the village. Divisions formed, suspicions deepened, and the whispers of jealousy became accusations. A stranger walked into the village with a confident stride, drawing curious stares. His steps were firm, his presence bold. He paused near a gathering of villagers, listening as they spoke of the deaths, their voices low and fearful. "It's her," one said. "Every time it's her." Intrigued, he lingered, absorbing their words. Later he crossed paths with the healer and offered a wry smile. "Curses don't scare me," he said, his voice carrying an edge of skepticism. The healer studied him carefully before nodding. "Then perhaps you're what this village needs." By the river, the woman sat alone once more, her figure still, as stone. The stranger approached, his curiosity leading him closer. He spoke with her, his questions direct but calm. Her answers were soft, her tone guarded. As she adjusted her shawl, his eyes caught the faint markings on her arm. He paused, his curiosity now sharper than before. Before he could ask, she pulled the shawl tightly around her and rose to leave. She moved away, her silence leaving him with more questions than answers. The villagers gathered under the chief's watchful eye, their voices raised in a heated argument. "She must leave," one shouted. "She brings death to our doors," another added. The healer stepped forward, raising a hand to calm the crowd. "We cannot let fear blind us from seeing the truth," he said firmly. For a moment the crowd quieted, but the divisions remained. The chief's expression grew heavy as he looked over his people, knowing their fears would not be easily calmed. Later, the stranger sought out the healer, his thoughts fixed on the markings he had seen. "I noticed symbols on her arm," he said. The healer hesitated, his unease clear. "I've seen them before," he admitted, "at the scenes of the deaths." "What do they mean?" the stranger pressed, but the healer offered no clear answer. Instead, he turned away, leaving the question to hang in the air. The marketplace buzzed again, the woman's name woven into every conversation. A group confronted her, their words sharp and cutting. "You bring death," one said. "You cannot hide forever," added another. The woman stood her ground, her expression calm despite their accusations. She said little, her silence seeming to confirm their suspicions. When she walked away, the tension between them only grew stronger. The stranger spoke with determination, his resolve clear. "I'm staying," he said, his voice firm. "I'll find the truth." The healer watched him closely before nodding. "Then we'll work together," he replied. The villagers noticed the partnership, their reactions a mix of hope and doubt. Some looked on with anticipation, others with suspicion. As the stranger began his search for answers, the weight of the village's fear hung over him, but his steps did not falter. A stranger arrived in the village, his steps bold and his presence commanding. Whispers followed him, for he was unlike the villagers, his attire and manner hinting at wealth and power. Word of the mysterious woman reached him quickly. Her beauty, her sorrow, her curse, it was all anyone could speak of. He listened, his lips curling into a confident smile. "Show me this woman," he said, and when he saw her, he stood before the crowd and raised his voice. A curse cannot frighten me, he declared. I will marry her. The villagers gasped, some shaking their heads, others murmuring in awe. The woman's eyes widened, but she said nothing. The crowd fell silent, stunned by his confidence. The healer knelt beside the body of the last groom. His hands moved with care, examining every detail. His fingers brushed against faint marks on the skin, marks he had seen before. A bitter scent lingered in the air, faint but familiar. He leaned closer, his voice low. This is no curse. It's something far darker. Later, he shared his findings. The words carried a weight that deepened the mystery. The stranger listened, his brow furrowing. Then we must look deeper, he said. The woman stood before the stranger, her voice trembling. You don't understand, she said. It's not safe. He dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. Your fears are unfounded, he replied. No harm will come to me. Her hands clenched, her eyes searching his face for understanding, but he would not relent. His confidence stood as a wall she could not break. The night was quiet, and the stranger's curiosity grew. He watched her move with purpose, her steps silent as she slipped into the shadows. He followed, keeping his distance, his breath steady. She reached the edge of the forest, where the trees grew thick and disappeared. He hesitated for only a moment before continuing. What is she hiding? He whispered to himself. Ahead, a faint light flickered, guiding him deeper into the woods. The woman knelt before an altar, her figure illuminated by its eerie glow. The stranger held his breath as he watched. A shadowy figure emerged from the light, its presence heavy and menacing. Your debt is not repaid, the figure growled, its voice echoing like thunder. You will obey. The woman's voice broke as she pleaded. Please, I've done all you asked. The figure laughed, cold and cruel. Its form twisted, its edges sharp as it loomed over her. The shadow spoke again, its words revealing a dark truth. Your family broke their promise, and now you pay the price. Any man who dares to marry you shall die, for you belong to me. The woman wept, her tears falling silently. She begged for freedom, but the shadow only laughed. Your fate is sealed, it said. You will never be free. The stranger's hands tightened into fists. The stranger retreated from the forest, his mind racing. She's trapped, he murmured. The truth weighed heavy on him. She was not the villain the villagers believed her to be. She was a victim, bound by a cruel curse. Resolve hardened in his chest. I'll find a way to save her, he vowed. Thus, village buzzed with activity as preparations for the wedding began. The stranger stood tall, his decision unwavering. The woman, however, looked at the villagers with pleading eyes. Please, she said softly, this cannot happen. But the villagers ignored her words. Some whispered anxiously, unsure of what the day would bring. Others watched with grim anticipation, waiting for the curse to strike again. The stranger approached the healer, his voice low but firm. We must find a way to stop this. The healer nodded, his face solemn. I'll do what I can. The woman sat alone, her face pale, her shoulders slumped. The weight of the curse bore down on her, and her silence spoke volumes. The stranger found her and sat nearby. There's more to this than anyone knows, he said, his voice steady. Trust me. I will help you. She didn't respond. Her eyes held a depth of sorrow, and though she said nothing, it was clear. She had long given up hope. The night grew quiet, leaving them both in the heavy stillness. The village erupted with life. Drums thundered in celebration, voices rose in song, and feet moved in rhythmic steps. The wedding was grand with bright colors and joyful cries. Laughter mingled with whispers of doubt, for fear lurked beneath the festivity. Adaku stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes sharp and her smile thin. This will not end well, she murmured, her tone laced with satisfaction. At the center of it all, Io exchanged vows with Bakari. Her smile was brittle, her hands trembling as they joined his. The crowd cheered, though a chill hung in the Oxim air that no one could shake. As the villagers returned to their homes, the night grew silent, unnaturally so. Outside the hut, shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker. The air was still, but for the sound of something slithering. The black mamba appeared, its body sleek and deadly, gliding past the doorway before disappearing into the shadows. Inside, Bakari prepared to rest, his confidence unshaken. A sudden gust of wind swept through the hut, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness consumed the room and the air grew thick. A form emerged, tall and menacing, its eyes glowing faintly. The spirit had arrived. Nearby, Omari crouched in the shadows, his grip tight around a glowing relic. He had been waiting, his heart pounding. As the spirit's form solidified, Omari moved. "Not tonight, spirit." His voice rang out, trembling, but determined. The relic's glow brightened, forcing the spirit to recoil. It hissed, its form rippling like smoke. Omari stepped forward, holding the relic high, but the spirit twisted and lunged. The air crackled as their battle began. The spirit lashed out with tendrils of shadow, its strength vast and unyielding. Omari held his ground, the relic shielding him from the worst of the blows, but each step forward was a struggle. Suddenly, the door burst open and Io stormed in. Her face was pale but resolute. She stood between Bakari and the spirit, her arms outstretched. "Take me," she cried. Her voice was steady, though tears ran down her face. "This ends now." The spirit paused, its movements slowing. It loomed over her, its voice low and cold. "You would give yourself willingly?" Io nodded, her jaw tight. The spirit laughed, the sound sharp and chilling. Its form grew larger, darker, as if feeding on her despair. The spirit's voice dropped further, filling the space like thunder. "Your bloodline betrayed me. Long ago, they made a promise. They broke it and stole what was mine. For this, I curse them. You are their payment, and I will not be denied." Io listened, her tears falling freely now. The weight of the spirit's words pressed on her, yet her resolve did not waver. "You will have me," she said, her voice softer but no less determined. The spirit seemed pleased, its laughter fading into a dark hum. Io stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the spirit. She stood tall, her fear replaced by quiet strength. "Let this end," she said. "Take me, and let the suffering stop." The spirit hesitated for a moment, as if savoring the moment. Then it reached out, its form wrapping around her. The room filled with a blinding light, brighter than the sun. Omari shielded his eyes as the relic in his hands shattered, its pieces falling to the ground. The light grew, consuming the spirit, until it was gone. When the brightness faded, Io was no longer there. As dawn broke, the villagers gathered near the hut. Their faces were etched with worry and curiosity. When Bakari stepped out, he was unharmed, though his expression was shaken. Omari followed, his steps heavy. He recounted the events of the night, his words careful and measured. He spoke of the spirit, the curse, and the bravery that had saved them all. He did not speak of Io's final act, choosing instead to honor her memory with silence. The villagers fell quiet, their gazes lowering in shame and awe. They understood now what they had not before. Io's selflessness had saved them, and her name would not be forgotten. The first light of dawn crept over the village, soft but uncertain. People gathered outside Bakari's hut, their faces tense and drawn. They spoke in whispers, their voices heavy with both hope and fear. The air held its breath until Omari stepped out. He was weary, his face marked with the strain of the night, but his eyes carried triumph. He raised a hand to quiet the murmurs. "The curse is broken," he said simply. Relief spread like a wave, soft cries of joy mingling with hushed disbelief. Though the words brought comfort, Some still glanced at the forest with wary eyes, unsure if the danger had truly passed. Inside, Bakari knelt before the chief. His voice was low, weighed down with guilt and gratitude. "She saved me," he admitted, his words slow. "I should have listened." The chief's gaze was steady, his voice firm. "Her sacrifice must not be forgotten." He stood and addressed those gathered. "We owe her more than words. Let her name be honored for what she has done." The villagers nodded, though their expressions showed they were only beginning to understand the depth of what had happened. Later, she walked through the village, her steps silent and steady. Eyes followed her, some filled with awe, others with regret. She met no one's gaze until she reached Omari. For a moment, their eyes locked, an unspoken understanding passing between them. He nodded, his respect clear, and she returned it with a faint, bittersweet smile. Without a word, she turned and made her way toward the edge of the forest. She disappeared into the trees, leaving behind a memory that clung to the air like a gentle mist. Omari stood before the villagers, his voice carrying a new resolve. "Her story must not be forgotten," he said. "The world will know what she endured, what she gave for all of us." He declared his decision to stay, his work far from finished. The villagers, once skeptical of him, now looked upon him with respect. They began to see him not just as an outsider, but as a guardian of her legacy. Kofi stepped forward, offering his support. Together, they would preserve the truth and ensure that her sacrifice would be remembered. Kofi called the villagers together, his voice firm but calm. "Fear has ruled us for too long," he began. "We must honor her by changing our ways." The crowd listened, their heads bowed in shame. Slowly they agreed, pledging to abandon superstition and fear. "If she returns, she will find a village ready to welcome her," Kofi said. The promise, though simple, marked the beginning of something new, a shift toward healing. Adaku stood apart, her face flushed with humiliation. The truth had stripped her of her power, and the villagers now avoided her. She whispered to herself, "I was wrong." Her words, though quiet, carried the weight of regret, but her pride held her back from saying them aloud. With her influence shattered, she gathered her things and left. Her departure was met with indifference, her absence a relief. The village began to rebuild, not just in walls and homes, but in spirit. Songs and dances filled the air once more, their melodies celebrating the end of the curse. The black mamba, once feared, was now seen as a symbol of change. Its presence was no longer a threat, but a reminder of the spirit's departure and the peace that had come at last. Children laughed freely, their voices unburdened, as the villagers moved forward, inspired by Ayo's courage and Omari's determination. Months passed, and the village settled into its newfound peace. One evening, a hunter returning from the forest stopped abruptly. At the edge of the trees, she stood, her figure half hidden in the shadows. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. Slowly she smiled, a faint but clear gesture, before turning and vanishing into the forest. When the hunter shared what he had seen, the villagers listened with quiet awe. They took her appearance as a blessing, a sign that she had found peace, and still watched over them. Her story became legend, her name spoken with reverence. The village, once divided by fear, now united in hope, carried her memory forward. The villagers gathered in the open, their faces solemn. They spoke of her sacrifice, their voices soft with awe and regret. Fear had once blinded them, but her courage had shown them the way. "She gave herself for us," one said, shaking his head. Kofi stood, his voice steady. "Fear once blinded us, but her courage has opened our eyes. We must never forget this lesson." A quiet agreement rippled through the crowd. New traditions began to take root. Songs were composed to honor her name, and elders spoke of her bravery in stories meant to teach the young. A young girl asked timidly, "Was she really cursed?" The question lingered, heavy in the air, until Kofi answered, "Curses are born, From fear and ignorance, he explained. What we called a curse was the weight of promises broken long ago. It was not hers to bear, yet she carried it for us all. The villagers lowered their heads in shame. They had isolated her, believing whispers and fear over truth. One stood and spoke. We were wrong to judge her. We must embrace compassion, not superstition. The chief raised his hand, his voice firm. We must never let ignorance rule us again. Let her sacrifice remind us to seek understanding before casting blame. Omari gathered the children beneath the great tree. His words were calm but carried weight. She carried a burden that wasn't hers, he began. Yet she fought for all of us. Her strength came from her heart, not her hands. The children leaned in, their eyes wide as they listened to the tale. He spoke of her kindness, her courage, and the sacrifices she made. By the end, the children were silent, their admiration clear. She is an example for us all, Omari said. Remember her, and be brave when your time comes. He addressed the villagers next, his voice steady and strong. When fear ruled us, we were divided. It nearly destroyed us, but her bravery brought us together. A brief memory came to him, how the village had turned on each other, blaming and fighting in their desperation. We must remain united, he continued. Together, we are stronger than any curse. The villagers nodded, their resolve solidifying. They had learned, and they would not forget. Years passed, and the forest remained quiet. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a hunter returning to the village stopped suddenly. At the edge of the trees, she stood, her figure faint and still. She was barely visible, her presence like a shadow against the fading light. The hunter watched as she turned, her face calm, and gave a faint smile before disappearing into the trees. When he shared what he had seen, the villagers listened in silence. They understood her appearance as a blessing, a sign that she had found peace and still watched over them. Omari stood before the villagers one last time, his words soft but powerful. Her story is our guide, he said, his gaze lingering on the forest. Let it remind us of what we can overcome, together. The villagers bowed their heads, the message clear in their hearts. The tale was passed from one generation to the next, its message unchanging. Unity, bravery, and compassion could overcome any curse. And so, her name was remembered, her legacy alive in the hearts of those she saved.